The 50-cent piece skittered across the worn marble counter and came to rest near the register. It wasn't a tip, it was a performance. "Enjoy your tips, sis," my brother said, his voice loud enough for the entire morning rush at Golden Mornings to hear. I felt the familiar heat rise in my neck, a dull, practiced flush of humiliation. From the corner booth, I saw Mrs. Patterson, our most loyal regular, wince and look down into her decaf. Detective Morrison, perched on his usual stool, didn't even flinch, but his eyes lifted slowly from his newspaper, flat and assessing. I forced the smile that I had perfected over the last 6 months. It was the smile of a good daughter, a good sister, a good little doormat. "Thank you, Bradley. Have a wonderful day." "Oh, I will," he said, adjusting the cuffs of his bespoke suit. He gave a dismissive look at the mismatched chairs and faded photographs on the wall. "Big client meeting. You know, the kind of thing successful people do." He tapped his designer watch, smirked one last time, and pushed through the glass door. I watched him get into his gleaming black SUV, a vehicle that cost more than this entire cafe probably made in a year. He revved the engine, a throaty growl that cut through the morning calm, and pulled into the Manhattan traffic, disappearing into a life I apparently wasn't suited for. "Waiting table suits you," he'd said last week. The bell above the door chimed softly as he left, a gentle sound that belied the ugly scene that had just played out. I slid the 50 cents into the tip jar, where it clinked pitifully against the few dollars and coins already there. This was my life. Every morning at 5:30 a.m., I, Claire Morrison, 28-year-old graphic designer with a portfolio that had once drawn praise, unlocked the doors to Golden Mornings. I put my freelance career on hold 6 months ago when my grandfather, Harold, had called. His longtime employee had quit without notice, and his voice, thin as paper, had trembled when he asked, "Claire, sweetheart, would you mind helping an old man out for just a few days?" Those few days had turned into every single morning. Because how do you say no to the only person who truly raised you? This cafe was his life. Back in the 1980s, Golden Mornings had been an empire, 12 locations across New York, a testament to his and Grandma Ruth's shared dream. Then she died, and suddenly, the empire didn't matter. He sold everything, all 12 booming locations, except this one. The small corner cafe on 42nd in Lexington where they'd had their first date, where he'd proposed, and where they'd spent their happiest years. Now, it was just a tiny slice of nostalgia, a relic in a city that devoured everything old. And I was the one helping him hold on to it. In the back, I heard Grandpa Harold coughing, a dry, racking sound that always tightened my chest. He emerged a moment later, wiping his hands on his apron, the same one I wore. "Was that Bradley?" he asked, his eyes moving to the door. "Just leaving," I said, keeping my voice light. "He was in a hurry. Big meeting." Harold nodded slowly, his gaze lingering on the tip jar. He knew. He always knew. He'd seen the casual cruelty Bradley reserved just for me, the way our parents had their entire lives. While they were busy funding Bradley's prep school and law degree, celebrating their golden boy, Harold was the one who bought me my first sketchbook. He was the one who told me my dreams were practical, even when my parents called them hobbies. Bradley, and by extension, my parents, saw this cafe as an embarrassment, a failure, a dusty and profitable burden run by a senile old man. They saw my presence here as confirmation of my own failure, a pathetic detour from a real career. They couldn't see the love story baked into these walls. They only saw the prime Manhattan real estate it was sitting on. "He means well," Harold murmured, a defense that sounded weaker every time he used it. "I know, Grandpa," I lied. I went back to work, steaming milk, calling out orders, wiping down tables. But something about today's humiliation felt different. It wasn't just the 50 cents. It was the casual, public way he'd thrown it, as if to prove to the entire room that I was nothing more than the help. I caught my reflection in the stainless steel of the espresso machine. The woman staring back looked tired, defeated, and small, her features blurred by steam and coffee stains. I had spent 28 years learning that keeping the peace was more important than standing up for myself. I smiled when Bradley insulted me because making a scene would embarrass Grandpa. I let my parents criticize my life choices because arguing was exhausting. But as I looked at my grandfather, who was now slowly arranging pastries in the display case, a quiet, cold anger began to settle in my stomach. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about him, his legacy, and the vultures who were circling, disguised as family. I didn't know, then, that we only had a month left. I didn't know that this daily humiliation was just the prelude to the real war. I didn't know that Grandpa Harold, in his quiet, unassuming way, had been watching and planning. I just knew that as I served Detective Morrison his black coffee, I made a silent promise. I was done being small. Bradley was right about one thing. Waiting tables did suit me. It had taught me to serve, to listen, and to see. And I was beginning to see everything. The text message arrived on Thursday, vibrating against the counter, just as I was bagging a muffin for Mrs. Patterson. It was from Bradley. Need to talk. Family dinner Sunday. Important family business to discuss. A chill, unrelated to the November air, snaked down my spine. We hadn't had a family dinner in months. Not since a disastrous Christmas where Bradley had spent 2 hours outlining his recent legal victories. Important family business was code, and in our family, it always meant one thing. Bradley wanted something. Another text buzzed immediately. Bring Mom's lasagna recipe. The one Grandpa likes. The casual command, the strategic mention of Grandpa, made my stomach twist. This wasn't just a request, it was a summons. And I was the designated caterer. When Sunday arrived, I walked into my parents' dining room feeling like a lamb walking into an ambush. Mom had set the table with the good china, the kind that only came out when Bradley needed to impress someone. Dad David sat at the head of the table, already wearing his serious conversation expression, his brow furrowed in a way that was meant to convey deep thought but usually just signaled capitulation to my mother. And Bradley, my older brother, lounged in his chair as if he already owned the room, scrolling through his phone. Claire, darling, you're here, Mom, Eleanor, said, bustling from the kitchen. She took the heavy lasagna pan from my hands, her eyes scanning my outfit, jeans and a simple sweater, with a flicker of disapproval. You look tired. Are you sleeping enough? That cafe is running you ragged. It was the opening salvo, cloaked in concern. I'm fine, Mom. Just busy. I sat in my usual spot, directly across from Bradley. He didn't look up. Speaking of busy, he said, tapping his phone screen. How's the little coffee shop thing going? Still enjoying playing barista? It's going well, I said, my voice tight. Grandpa seems to enjoy the company. He finally locked his phone and placed it face down on the table, a gesture of profound sacrifice. He fixed me with the same calculating look he used on witnesses. And he's paying you for this, right? For all this help? The question hung in the air, sharp and metallic. It's not about money, Bradley. He's family. Family, who owns a piece of prime Manhattan real estate, Bradley countered smoothly. Property that's going to need proper management as he gets older. Dad cleared his throat, the signal that the main event was beginning. Claire, that's actually what we wanted to discuss with you. Your grandfather's future. His care. Mom returned and began serving the lasagna I had made, her movements sharp. We're worried about him, darling. Living alone, running that cafe every day. It's too much for an 82-year-old man. It's not safe. He loves that cafe, I protested, the words automatic. It's where he and Grandma Ruth. Yes, we know the story, Bradley cut in, waving his hand dismissively. But sentiment doesn't pay for medical bills, Claire. It doesn't pay for 24-hour assisted living. I set my fork down. What exactly are you suggesting? Bradley leaned forward, his mask of indifference replaced by a predatory gleam. I've done some research. I had a developer friend of mine run the numbers. That corner property, as is worth at least $2 million. Maybe more if we market it right. He could sell the building, retire comfortably. We could move him somewhere more appropriate. Somewhere more appropriate? I repeated, my voice rising. That cafe is his home. It's his history. You want to take that away from him? Claire, Dad said, using his patient, condescending tone. We understand you're attached to the idea of it all. But we have to be practical. Harold isn't getting any younger. And let's be honest, that place isn't profitable. How would you know? I snapped, the question erupting before I could stop it. When was the last time any of you even visited him there? The silence that followed was thick and damning. That's not the point, Mom said, her cheeks flushing. The point is that your grandfather needs family looking out for his best interests. I am looking out for his best interests, I said, my hands clenching in my lap. I'm there every day. I see what that place means to him. It's not just a building. Bradley slid a sleek leather-bound folder from his briefcase and opened it on the table. Actually, it is just a building. A very valuable one. He's been declining rental offers for years, Claire. He's sitting on a gold mine and refusing to capitalize on it. It's financially irresponsible. They wanted me to be their messenger. The betrayal of it was a physical ache. So you want me to go to him and convince him to sell his entire life so you can get your hands on his money. That is not what we're saying. Mom insisted, though her eyes darted to Bradley. We're saying, Bradley said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial calm, that he's vulnerable. He trusts you. You're the only one who can make him see reason. He'll listen to you. If you explain to him that this is what's best for his health, that we're all just worried about him, he'll sign the papers. The trap was laid, and I was the bait. They had orchestrated this entire dinner, right down to the lasagna I was forced to make, to pressure me into betraying the one person in our family who had never, not once, asked me for anything. I pushed my chair back and stood up. The screech of the wood against the floor was satisfyingly loud. No, no, Bradley repeated, blinking as if the word were a foreign language. No, I won't do it. I will not help you manipulate an old man into selling his home. Bradley's expression hardened, the last scrap of brotherly pretense vanishing. You're being sentimental, Claire. And naive. This isn't a game. He needs proper care. What if he falls? What if he gets sick? Then I'll be there to take care of him. I shot back. Like I have been. Where have you been? Don't you dare, Mom whispered, her face pale. We are his family. We are trying to protect him. No, I said, my voice shaking with a cold, clear rage I hadn't known I possessed. You're trying to profit. There's a difference. I grabbed my coat and walked to the door. I could feel their eyes on my back, a unified front of disbelief and anger. I was no longer just the disappointing daughter. I was the obstacle. You're making a huge mistake, Claire, Bradley called out. When he ends up in some state-funded nursing home because you were too selfish to see the big picture, that'll be on you. I slammed the door behind me. The important family business was done. The battle lines were drawn. And I had just declared war. It happened on a Tuesday. The morning rush had just thinned, leaving the cafe in a comfortable mid-morning lull. I was wiping down the espresso machine when I heard it. Not a crash, but a soft, heavy thud. I spun around. Grandpa. He was on the floor behind the counter, half hidden by the register. He hadn't fallen. He had collapsed, his hand pressed tight to his chest, his face a shocking ashen gray. His eyes were open, wide with a mixture of pain and surprise. Claire, he whispered, his voice thin as steam. I think I'm having a heart attack. The world dissolved into a blur of sirens, sterile white hallways, and the acrid smell of antiseptic. I sat in the uncomfortable plastic chair of the Mount Sinai waiting room, still wearing my coffee-stained apron, my hands shaking. I'd made the calls, my fingers fumbling on the phone. Asterisk Mom. Bradley. It's Grandpa. Mount Sinai. Heart attack. Asterisk. Bradley arrived first, naturally. He didn't look like a grandson visiting a hospital. He looked like a lawyer arriving for a deposition. His briefcase clicked open before he even sat down. How is he? He asked, his eyes already on his phone. They're running tests. They said it was definitely a heart attack. Right. He nodded, all business. I'll call his primary care physician. We need his medical records transferred. Does he have a living will? Advance directives? Medical power of attorney? He's in the emergency room. Bradley. Not a boardroom. I whispered, the words sharp with panic and disgust. Mom and Dad arrived 20 minutes later, Mom clutching her purse like a shield, Dad looking pale and uncomfortable. They made the appropriate sounds of concern, but their eyes kept darting to Bradley as if waiting for instructions. A young, competent-looking doctor finally emerged. Mr. Morrison's family? We all stood. He's stable. He did suffer a moderate heart attack. We've got him on medication, and we'll be monitoring him in the cardiac unit. The next few days are critical. What's the prognosis? Bradley asked, stepping forward to intercept her. With proper care and significant lifestyle modifications, he should recover. But this was a major warning. He'll need to reduce stress, stop all strenuous physical activity, and have regular monitoring. The kind of changes that often require support. I saw it. The flicker that passed between my brother and my parents. This wasn't a tragedy to them. It was an opportunity. This was the leverage they had been waiting for. When we were finally allowed to see him, he looked impossibly small in the hospital bed, a web of tubes, and wires connecting him to the beeping machines beside him. But his eyes were alert, and they found mine instantly. Did you lock the register? He rasped. Tears pricked my eyes. I took care of everything, Grandpa. Just rest. Mom rushed forward, grabbing his other hand. Oh, Harold, we were so worried. You gave us such a fright. You need to rest now, Dad added, hovering near the foot of the bed. The doctor was very clear. No more stress. Bradley hung back, his arms crossed, observing. Harold, he said, his voice laced with practiced solemnity. The doctor mentioned you'll need significant lifestyle changes. We want to help. This cafe, it's just too much. The cafe keeps me young, Harold said, his voice surprisingly firm. Ruth and I built that place. I'm not giving it up. No one's asking you to give it up, Mom said, her tone a high, soothing coo that set my teeth on edge. We're just saying it's time to let us take care of the business side of things. Let us handle the pressure so you can just enjoy your retirement. Enjoy retirement? Harold's eyes narrowed. You mean sell my home and move into one of those appropriate places Bradley found? The silence in the room was electric. They hadn't expected him to be this sharp, this aware. Harold, this is exactly what we're talking about, Bradley said, dropping the pretense. You just had a heart attack. You can't be trusted to make rational decisions about your health. The stress of that failing business is what put you here. The only stress I'm feeling right now is coming from you, Harold shot back. Grandpa, I said, stepping between him and my brother. Don't. Just rest. I turned to my family. He needs to rest. The doctor said no stress. We can talk about this later. Claire, honey, this is about his health, Mom said, patting my arm. We just want what's best. And what's best, Bradley finished, is selling that property and ensuring he has the funds for proper, round-the-clock care. The kind of care he clearly needs. He doesn't need a nursing home, I said, my voice shaking. He needs his family. He needs his home. You're being sentimental, Claire, Bradley snapped. And your sentimentality is going to get him killed. Get out, Harold whispered from the bed. What? Bradley asked. Get out. All of you. Except Claire. The three of them stared, shocked into silence by the sudden, raw command. Bradley's face flushed a deep, angry red. Mom looked like she'd been slapped. Fine, Bradley spat. But don't say we didn't warn you. When you can't handle him, don't come crawling to us for help. They left, a whirlwind of resentment and indignation. I sank into the chair beside Harold's bed, my body trembling. He reached out and gripped my hand, his skin papery and cold. 3 days later, against his doctor's advice, Harold checked himself out and was back at the cafe. He sat on a stool behind the counter, supervising me. He was quieter, paler, and I could tell the confrontation had shaken him more than the heart attack. That evening, after we closed, he called me into the tiny back office. Sit down, Claire. He moved slowly, unlocking a small, metal strongbox I'd never seen before. What happened at the hospital? I knew it was coming. I just didn't think they'd be so bold about it. He pulled out a thick, worn manila envelope and slid it across the desk. I need you to see this. I need you to understand what this fight is really about. I opened the class and pulled out a stack of documents. They weren't cafe ledgers. They were investment statements. Property deeds from the other locations, the ones he'd sold decades ago. Stock certificates. Bank records from a private wealth management firm. The numbers blurred. I saw 6 figures, then 7. I saw accounts with names like Ruth Morrison Memorial Trust and Golden Mornings Holdings. Grandpa, what is this? I thought the cafe was all you had. That, he said, tapping the papers, is what your grandmother built. She wasn't just a great baker, Claire. She was brilliant. When we sold the other locations, she didn't spend the money. She invested it. All of it. I looked at the final summary page of a portfolio statement. My breath caught in my throat. Grandpa, this says $6 million. $6,200,000 as of last quarter, he said calmly. But why? Why live like this? Why struggle with the cafe? Why let me think you were barely getting by? Because, he said, his eyes sad and infinitely wise, money changes people. It poisons them. Your grandmother and I, we wanted to see who our family really was. We wanted to see who loved us, not what we had. We always planned to tell your mother, but then Bradley grew up, and we saw how they were. How they worshipped his success, his money, and how they dismissed you because you had a kind heart instead of a killer instinct. He leaned forward, his voice a low, urgent whisper. Your brother doesn't want to sell a $2 million building, Claire. He sniffed out the inheritance. He's been asking questions, trying to get access to my finances for a year. He's trying to get control before I die. It all clicked into place. The dinner, the family business, the pressure, the ambush at the hospital. This wasn't about protecting an old man. It was a hostile takeover. They think I'm a confused old man who needs protection, Harold said, his voice hardening. They're about to find out how wrong they are. This isn't just my fight anymore, sweetheart. It's yours, too. The revelation of $6 million didn't bring relief. It brought a cold, sharp-edged clarity. The air in the tiny back office felt thin. My grandfather wasn't just a beloved cafe owner. He was a target. And by showing me that envelope, he had just painted one on my back, too. This is a chess match, Claire, Harold said, his hands resting on the closed strongbox. Your family thinks they're playing against a pawn, but they're playing against a king. And a queen. He looked pointedly at me. But we have to move quickly. Bradley is a lawyer. He knows the system. He'll use concern and welfare as weapons to strip me of my rights. So what's our first move? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. We get a better lawyer. Margaret Chen's law office was everything Bradley's wasn't. It was on a quiet street in a brownstone, filled with warm light, overflowing bookshelves and comfortable chairs. There were no glass and chrome tables meant to intimidate. Margaret herself was a woman in her 50s with kind, sharp eyes that seemed to miss nothing. We sat across from her, and for an hour, Harold talked. He told her everything. The original empire, Ruth's brilliance, the secret portfolio, his heart attack, and the ambush at the hospital. He laid out his fears, that Bradley would petition for guardianship, claim he was incompetent, and seize control of his assets. He's already started. I added, my voice tight. He's been telling us Dad's confused for months. He's building a narrative. Margaret Chen nodded slowly, taking notes. Unfortunately, this is incredibly common. And Bradley is right about one thing. He can use the system. Adult children petitioning for guardianship over wealthy, elderly parents. Judges see it every day. And they often err on the side of protection, which means they'll grant the petition, especially with a recent health scare like your heart attack, Harold. My grandfather's face was grim. So how do we fight that? We don't just fight it, Margaret said, leaning forward. We cut it off at the knees. We build an ironclad fortress around your estate, your will, and your competency, starting today. First, a new last will and testament that is explicit, detailed, and clear. Second, a living trust, to move your primary assets, including the portfolio, out of your name and into the trusts, with you as the trustee. That makes it much harder to attack through probate court. Third, and most importantly, we document your mental state. Bradley will claim you're senile, confused, and being manipulated by Claire. We need impartial, credible witnesses who can testify, under oath, that you are sharp, lucid, and in full control of your faculties. I have just the man, Harold said, a small, grim smile playing on his lips. The next morning, Detective Morrison came in for his usual black coffee. The post-rush quiet had settled over the cafe, and Mrs. Patterson was the only other customer lost in her novel. Harold waved him over to the corner booth, the one where he and Ruth used to sit. I stayed behind the counter, pretending to wipe down the espresso machine, but I watched them. It wasn't a long conversation. Harold spoke quietly, earnestly. Morrison listened, his face impassive. I saw him nod once, then twice. He wasn't just a customer. He was an old friend, a man who had watched my family's dynamics play out from his stool for 3 years. He had seen Bradley's 50-cent insults. He had seen my parents' dismissive indifference. After 10 minutes, Morrison stood up, clapping a hand on Harold's shoulder. He walked to the counter to pay, but his eyes met mine. "Morning, Claire," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Detective, everything okay?" He slid a $5 bill onto the counter and pushed it toward the tip jar. "Keep your eyes open, kid. Your grandfather is a smart man. But this business, family business, it can get complicated. Some people mistake kindness for weakness." He tapped the counter. "You just call me if anyone gives you or your grandfather any trouble. You understand?" "I understand. Thank you." He nodded, just catching up with an old friend. "See you tomorrow." He was our witness. He was our insurance. The next few days were a blur of quiet activity. Harold and I met with Margaret again, signing documents. We met with a financial advisor to discuss the trust. On the surface, life at the cafe continued. I served coffee, Harold managed the register from his stool, and Mrs. Patterson read her book. But beneath the surface, the war had begun. My phone buzzed with texts from my mother. "Claire, your father and I are just so worried. Harold won't return our calls. Bradley is looking into some lovely retirement communities just to visit. Why are you being so difficult?" I ignored them. Then, the first official shot was fired. It was a Friday morning. Harold was in the back counting inventory when the bell on the door chimed. 2 people entered, a man and a woman, both wearing inexpensive suits and carrying official-looking clipboards. They didn't look like coffee drinkers. "Can I help you?" I asked, my hand tightening on the portafilter. The woman fixed me with a practiced, neutral gaze. "We're from Adult Protective Services. We're here to see Mr. Harold Morrison." My blood turned to ice. They'd done it. "We've received an anonymous report," the man said, looking around the cafe with an air of mild disapproval. A report expressing significant concern for Mr. Morrison's welfare, his living conditions, and his mental capacity to live independently. I could hear Harold's footsteps approaching from the back room. The chess match was no longer a secret. It was here, and they had just moved their bishop straight for our king. Family Court was a sterile, beige room that smelled of industrial cleaner and stale coffee. It was a place designed to dismantle lives with bureaucratic efficiency, and we were next. It didn't feel like a hearing. It felt like a trial. My grandfather, a man who had built an empire, paid his taxes for 60 years, and loved his family, was now the defendant, and his crime was wanting to control his own life. We sat at the left table, Grandpa Harold, looking dignified but frail in his best suit, Margaret Chun, her files arranged in neat, confident stacks, and me, my hands clasped so tightly in my lap my knuckles were white. Across the aisle sat the prosecution, Bradley, his face a mask of cold, legal concern. His lawyer, a sharp-looking woman named Patricia Hawthorne, who specialized in elder law, which I now understood was a polite term for asset seizure. And behind them, my parents, David and Eleanor, looking uncomfortable but resolute, as if they had convinced themselves this public execution was for Harold's own good. A tired-looking man in his 60s, Judge Morrison, no relation, I'd already checked, entered and we all stood. He sighed, looked down at the file, and began. "This is a petition for the guardianship of Harold Morrison," he said, his voice a monotone. "Filed by family members expressing concern for his mental capacity, his physical welfare, and his susceptibility to undue financial influence. Ms. Hawthorne, you may begin." Patricia Hawthorne stood, all sharp angles and quiet confidence. "Thank you, Your Honor. The petitioners, Mr. Morrison's son-in-law and his grandchildren, love Mr. Morrison dearly." I almost choked. "But they have observed," she continued, "a concerning pattern of behavior. His recent, severe heart attack has, we believe, accelerated a cognitive decline. He is making decisions that are not in his best interest." He's being manipulated by his granddaughter, Claire Morrison. She gestured to me, and I felt the entire room's eyes on me, a wave of heat. An individual with no financial training who has been allowed to manage his business affairs and has systematically isolated him from the rest of his family. She presented their case. It was a masterpiece of twisted facts. Harold's refusal to sell the unprofitable cafe was proof of poor judgment. His reliance on me for help was proof of diminished capacity. The APS report they had triggered was presented as evidence of a dangerous living situation. She even had a psychological evaluation from a doctor who had interviewed Harold for 30 minutes. A doctor, I realized with a jolt, whom Bradley must have hired. Mr. Morrison is a vulnerable adult, she concluded, her voice dripping with false sympathy. He is being exploited. His family is here today to ask the court to protect him from that exploitation and from his own poor judgment. When it was Margaret's turn, she stood with a calm that was almost unnerving. Your Honor, what we have here is not a case of elder abuse. It is a case of elder abuse, but the perpetrators are sitting at the petitioner's table. Bradley shot to his feet. Objection. That is inflammatory and unsubstantiated. Sit down, Mr. Morrison, the judge grumbled. It's her opening statement. Continue, Miss Chun. But tread lightly. The evidence will show, Your Honor, Margaret said, that Mr. Morrison is sharp, lucid, and fully competent. The evidence will also show that this petition is a preemptive strike by family members who are, and I will substantiate this, motivated by greed, not concern. They wish to gain control of Mr. Morrison's assets, which they believe he is mismanaging, simply because he is not managing them in a way that benefits them. First, I would like to call Dr. Sarah Williams from Adult Protective Services. I saw Bradley's lawyer flinch. This was their witness. Dr. Williams, the same woman from the cafe, was sworn in. Dr. Williams, Margaret began, you visited Mr. Morrison in response to an anonymous tip. What were your findings? Mr. Morrison displayed complete mental clarity, Dr. Williams said, her voice clear and professional. His answers were precise. He understood his financial situation and his medical condition perfectly. I found no evidence of cognitive impairment or confusion. In fact, he was one of the most sophisticated subjects I've evaluated this year. And the granddaughter, Claire Morrison? Did you find any evidence of financial exploitation? On the contrary, Dr. Williams said. My assessment was that Mr. Morrison was the victim of an attempt at familial coercion. He expressed clear, rational fears that his family was trying to have him declared incompetent to seize his assets. I found no evidence of undue influence from Miss Claire Morrison. My office closed the case. The air went out of Bradley's side of the room. Next, Margaret called Mrs. Patterson. Our sweet, novel-reading regular looked terrified as she was sworn in, but her voice was firm. I see Harold every single day, she said. And let me tell you, that man is sharper than his grandson by a mile. He remembers my coffee order, he asks about my grandchildren by name, he gives me sensible advice. And I've seen how they treat him. His grandson, Bradley? He treats his sister like she's dirt, and his grandfather like he's a burden. It's shameful. That's what it is. Shameful. Then came Detective Morrison. He took the stand, his retired cop presence filling the room. He testified to his daily interactions with Harold. He testified, in flat, factual language, to witnessing Bradley's verbal abuse toward me and his condescending, concerned questioning of Harold. In my professional experience, Your Honor, Morrison said, people who are genuinely concerned about an elderly person's welfare don't start by trying to gain legal control of their assets. They start by spending time with them. Finally, Margaret called Harold. He walked to the stand slowly, but his back was straight. Mr. Morrison, Margaret said gently, can you please explain to the court your reasoning for your recent estate planning decisions? Certainly, Harold said, his voice clear and strong, resonating with an authority I hadn't heard in months. Your Honor, I've been managing my own affairs for 82 years. I built a business from scratch and, with my late wife, I built a significant portfolio. The only thing that has changed is that certain members of my family have realized I might leave my money to someone who actually loves me, rather than someone who sees me as a retirement plan. He looked directly at Bradley. My granddaughter Claire has spent 6 months of her life caring for me and my business, without asking for a single dollar in return. She shows up every day. She treats my life's work with respect. My other family members," he gestured to them, "spent that same 6 months trying to convince me I'm incompetent so they can sell my cafe and put me in a nursing home. They call it love, but love doesn't involve hiring attorneys to strip away a man's legal rights." Patricia Hawthorne tried to rattle him on cross-examination. "Mr. Morrison, isn't it true you had a heart attack? That your health is failing?" "I had a heart attack, yes," Harold said. "My heart is weak, but my mind is not, and I can still tell the difference between a vulture and a granddaughter." The judge had heard enough. He called a recess for deliberation. We waited in the hallway, the silence thick. Bradley paced, whispering furiously to his lawyer. My parents sat on a bench, looking, for the first time, sick with doubt. When we returned, Judge Morrison's face was stern. "After reviewing all testimony, this court finds no basis whatsoever for the appointment of a guardian. Mr. Harold Morrison has demonstrated complete mental competency and sound, rational reasoning for his decisions. This petition appears to be motivated more by the financial expectations of the petitioners than by any genuine concern for Mr. Morrison's welfare." He looked directly at Bradley and my parents. "This court is deeply concerned by the apparent, coordinated effort to present Mr. Morrison as incompetent. Such actions border on elder abuse." Petition dismissed. The gavel cracked like a gunshot. It was over. We had won. Harold squeezed my hand, and I saw tears shining in his eyes. As we walked out, Bradley, his face pale and slick with sweat, shouldered past us. My parents approached, hesitant. "Harold," my father began, his voice hoarse. "We never meant for—" "But you did," Harold said, his voice quiet but final. "You did go this far, and now we are done." For 3 weeks, Golden Mornings felt like a sanctuary. The victory in court had lifted a tangible weight from the air. Grandpa Harold, though physically frilier, seemed mentally lighter than he had in years. He sat on his stool, not as a man guarding his fortress, but as a king enjoying his domain. He shared stories with Mrs. Patterson, debated politics with Detective Morrison, and taught me the precise, almost spiritual, way Grandma Ruth used to foam milk for a cappuccino. We laughed. For 3 weeks, we were just a granddaughter and a grandfather running a cafe. The peace was so sweet it was almost painful, and a part of me, the part that had been trained by my family, kept waiting for the other shoe to drop. It dropped on a Wednesday, a gray, misty morning just before the first snow. I arrived at 5:30 a.m. as always, but the lights were off. Harold wasn't downstairs brewing the first pot, which he insisted on doing every morning. "Grandpa!" I called up the narrow stairs that led to his apartment. The silence that answered was heavy, not just quiet, but empty. A cold dread, sharper than the November air, seized my chest. I took the stairs 2 at a time, my hand sliding on the worn wooden banister. "Grandpa, are you awake?" The door to his apartment was slightly ajar. I pushed it open. The living room was neat, his reading glasses folded on top of a newspaper. The smell of the instant coffee he drank before bed hung faintly in the air. "Grandpa!" I walked into his bedroom. He was in bed, lying on his back, the covers pulled up to his chest. He looked peaceful, serene. There was no sign of a struggle, no pain etched onto his face. He looked, for the first time in my life, completely at rest. I knew, even before I touched his hand, that he was gone. His hand was cold. The doctor had warned us his heart was a fragile, damaged thing. It had held on long enough to win his fight. And then, quietly, in the dignity of his own home, it had simply stopped. I sank to my knees, the grief a physical blow, a sudden, suffocating weight. I had been so focused on the fight, on protecting him, that I hadn't prepared myself for this. I had saved his life from my family, but I couldn't save it from his body. My eyes fell on the nightstand. Next to his medication bottles and a glass of water, there was a single white envelope. My name was written on it, in his familiar, steady script. My hands shook as I picked it up. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "My dearest Claire, if you are reading this, then my fight is over and I am with my Ruth. Do not be sad for me. These last few months, watching you fight for this place, for me, they have been the proudest of my life. You have her heart, Claire. You have her strength. I knew you did, but I am writing this to warn you. The second phase of the battle is about to begin. Our victory in court did not end their greed, it inflamed it. They will be furious. Your brother will not see this as a loss. He will see my passing as his opportunity, and you as the only thing standing in his way. Do not let them bully you. The will is ironclad. Margaret Chun has everything. I have left you the tools to fight, Claire. Use every penny. Do not feel guilty. Do not hesitate. This is not just money, it is a legacy. It is your grandmother's hard work. It is the future I am entrusting to you. They will fight you. Let them. You are stronger than they are, because you are fighting for love. They are only fighting for money. And money, in the end, always loses to love. I love you more than you know. Be brave. Make us proud. Grandpa Harold. I folded the letter, the paper crinkling in my trembling grip. He had known. He had seen this coming, right to the very end. The grief didn't lessen, but it was joined by something else. A cold, hard resolve. The funeral was a tense, surreal affair. The small chapel was divided down the middle, as if by an invisible velvet rope. On my side sat the cafe. Mrs. Patterson was in the front row, clutching my hand, her shoulders shaking with quiet sobs. Detective Morrison sat behind us, his face a stoic mask. The rest of the pews were filled with regulars, neighborhood shop owners, and friends who had known and loved Harold. On the other side sat my family. Bradley, Mom and Dad. They sat stiffly in the front row, a dark, united trio. They were not in mourning. They were in formation. Their faces were hard, unreadable. They shed no tears. They just watched, the casket, the other mourners, and me. As the pastor spoke about a man who had built something beautiful and had the courage to protect it, I could feel Bradley's stare burning into the side of my head. He wasn't listening. He was calculating. He was strategizing. After the service, as we stood outside in the cold, gray air, they approached. Not to offer comfort, not to share a memory. Mom and Dad hovered behind Bradley, their faces pale and strained. "Claire," Bradley said. His voice was flat, devoid of all emotion. "No, I'm sorry. No, he was a good man. When is the will reading?" I stared at him, the raw, icy audacity of the question stealing my breath. Our grandfather was in a casket not 10 feet away, and he was asking about the money. I don't know. I stammered. Margaret Chun is handling it. I haven't. "Find out," he commanded. "Text me the details. We need to get this over with." He turned and walked away, my parents trailing in his wake like two pale shadows. I stood there, the cold wind whipping my hair across my face, and I finally understood. Harold was right. The battle hadn't ended in that courtroom. That was just a skirmish. Harold's death wasn't the end of the war. It was the starting gun, and the main event was about to begin. Margaret Chen's conference room was the opposite of her welcoming office. It was a place for battle, all hard surfaces, polished dark wood, and a long, imposing table that felt like a sacrificial altar. We gathered there the following Tuesday, a formal, funereal assembly. I sat with Margaret at one end. Bradley, my parents, and their lawyer, Patricia Hawthorne, sat at the other. The 8 feet of polished wood between us felt like a canyon. Bradley's face was a mask of impatient, barely concealed avarice. He kept checking his watch, as if this whole affair was an inconvenience. My mother twisted her gloves in her lap, while my father stared blankly at the tabletop. Margaret entered, carrying a single, thick, leather-bound folder. She sat at the head of the table. "We are here today," she began, her voice crisp and formal, for the reading of the last will and testament of Harold Morrison, properly witnessed and notarized on October 18th, 3 weeks prior to his passing and 2 days after the competency hearing. She put on her reading glasses and opened the folder. The room was so quiet I could hear the ticking of the clock on the wall. "I, Harold Morrison," she read, "being of sound mind and body." She began with the smaller bequests. To Mrs. Patterson, $10,000 for her unwavering friendship and for always remembering to ask about my Ruth. To Detective Morrison, $10,000 for his loyalty and for being a better protector than my own blood. She then turned to my parents. To my daughter, Eleanor Morrison, and my son-in-law, David, I leave the sum of $50,000 each. I saw my mother's face tighten. It was a significant sum, but clearly not what she expected. Margaret continued reading Harold's words. In recognition of their role in raising my granddaughter, Claire. Though they failed to see her worth, their neglect was, perhaps, the furnace that forged her strength. May this money help them understand what true wealth is. It was a devastating, gentlemanly slap from beyond the grave. My father flushed a deep, mottled red. "And now," Margaret said, her eyes lifting to look directly at my brother. "To my grandson, Bradley Morrison." This was it. Bradley leaned forward, the mask slipping, his eyes gleaming with anticipation. Margaret read, "To my grandson, Bradley, I leave the sum of $1 US." The silence that followed was absolute. Bradley just stared. He blinked, a slow, reptilian movement. "What? That's a joke. Read the rest." "That is the entirety of your bequest, Mr. Morrison," Margaret said calmly. "Save for this." She produced a small, hand-sealed envelope from the folder, the same stationery as the letter he'd left for me. "Your grandfather instructed this be given to you at this time." With visibly shaking hands, Bradley tore it open. He unfolded the single sheet of paper. I could see Harold's familiar, strong handwriting from across the table. Bradley's eyes scanned the page, his face draining of all color, going from red to a sickly, waxy white. "What is this?" he whispered, his voice hoarse. "Read it, Bradley," my mother urged, her voice high with panic. "This is insane!" he suddenly roared, slamming his fist on the table. The water glasses jumped. He was not competent. He was a senile, vindictive old man, and he pointed a shaking finger at me. She manipulated him. She poisoned him against his entire family. "I will not accept this. We will contest this. Patricia, we are contesting this. This is a clear case of undue influence." "Mr. Morrison," Margaretchen said, her voice cutting through his tirade like a shard of ice, "I would advise you to be seated. I have not finished reading the will." Bradley remained standing, panting, his face contorted in a mask of pure rage. "The remainder of the estate," Margaret continued, her voice rising slightly, including the Golden Mornings Cafe, the building and property at 42nd in Lexington, the family home by the lake which everyone assumed was sold, and the entirety of the investment portfolio held in the Golden Mornings Holdings Trust, valued at approximately $6,200,000, I leave in its entirety to my granddaughter, Claire Morrison. My mother made a small, strangled sound, like a dying bird. My father just sank back in his chair, his mouth open. $6 million, Bradley whispered, the words barely audible. He looked at me, his eyes wide, not with anger now, but with a horrifying, naked greed that was almost primal. You knew. You knew about this. You played us all." "She did no such thing," Margaret said. "Harold was in full control of his faculties, as established in a court of law, a proceeding you initiated, Mr. Morrison. And he anticipated this very reaction." "I don't care what you say," Bradley snarled, finding his voice again. "No court will uphold this. It's ludicrous. I'll have him declared incompetent post-mortem. I'll tie this up in court for years. You will never see a single dime of that money, Claire. I swear to God, I will spend every last cent I have to see you get nothing." "That," Margaret said, "is your grandfather's final point." She reached into the folder and pulled out 2 last items. The first was another document. Your grandfather, Mr. Morrison, was not a fool. He knew his family. This document establishes a trust fund of $1 million, separate from the main estate, with the sole, express purpose of defending this will against any and all legal challenges. Claire is instructed to spare no expense. Your grandfather has, in essence, funded her legal battle against you. Bradley's face went from white to gray. He looked like he was going to be sick. "And finally," Margaret said, pulling out a small, digital audio recorder, "your grandfather was, as you know, concerned about his memory. After your family dinner, and especially after the incident at the hospital, he installed a state-of-the-art security system in the cafe and his apartment. It included high-fidelity audio. He was meticulous about documenting his moments of confusion for his attorney." She pressed play. Bradley's voice, cold and clear, filled the room. "Make him see reason. If you explain to him that this is what's best for his health, he'll sign the papers. Then my mother's voice. We're just saying it's time to let us take care of the business side of things. Let us handle the pressure. Then Bradley again, this time from the hospital. You can't be trusted to make rational decisions. The stress of that failing business is what put you here. Margaret pressed stop. The silence was deafening. She had it all. The plotting. The conspiracy. The unadulterated, calculated greed. Patricia Hawthorne slowly closed her own briefcase. She looked at Bradley with undisguised contempt. My firm is withdrawing as your counsel, Mr. Morrison. Effective immediately. Do not contact me again. She stood up and walked out of the room. The fight went out of them all at once, a physical deflation. My parents looked ruined, exposed. Bradley sank into his chair, his head in his hands. He had been outmaneuvered, outlawyered, and outplanned by the confused old man he had despised. I looked at my family, this broken, pathetic, greedy trio, and I felt nothing. Not triumph, not anger, just a vast, cold, empty sadness. Harold had won. He had protected me. He had given me a future. But the price was the illusion that I ever had a family at all. 6 months passed. Winter thawed into a vibrant, defiant spring, and golden mornings thawed with it. The $1 million legal defense fund had been unnecessary. Bradley, disarmed and humiliated, had never filed his contest. The recordings, Margaret had assured me, were now locked away, a silent testament to the war that had been won. So, I had used the money for its other intended purpose, the legacy. I started with the cafe. I didn't gut it. I didn't replace its soul with chrome and glass. I revived it. I kept the worn marble counter, but I installed a brand-new, gleaming Italian espresso machine. I kept the mismatched chairs, but I had every single one reupholstered. The faded photographs of Harold and Ruth were professionally restored, their black and white joy now sharp and clear against a fresh coat of warm, creamy paint. I hired 2 part-time employees, baristas who understood this wasn't just a job, but a mission. I even found Grandma Ruth's old recipe book, tucked in the strongbox with the stock certificates, and her Empire cheesecake was already becoming a neighborhood legend. The cafe was bustling, alive with a new energy that honored the old one. We were profitable. We were thriving. I was working harder than I ever had in my life, not as a doormat, but as an owner, and I had never been happier. I was behind the counter, training a new hire on the perfect phone-to-milk ratio, when the bell above the door chimed. I looked up, a bright practice welcome on my lips, and the words died in my throat. It was Bradley, but it wasn't. The expensive suit was still there, but it hung on him, a relic from another life. He was thin, gaunt, his face sallow and unshaven. The predatory gleam in his eyes was gone, replaced by a hollow, haunted look. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in 6 months. He just stood by the door, watching the busy cafe, the laughing customers, the full tip jar, the vibrant life, as if he were a ghost visiting a world he no longer belonged to. My new barista glanced at him, then at me. "Claire, you okay?" My heart was hammering, a cold, heartbeat against my ribs. I felt a phantom flicker of the old fear, the instinct to shrink. It was immediately replaced by a calm, cold authority. My cafe. My terms. I untied my apron and laid it on the counter. "I've got this. Take 5. I walked toward him, and I saw him flinch, as if he expected me to yell, to call the police. I stopped a few feet away. "Hello, Bradley." "Claire," he said. His voice was a rasp, a dry scratch. He couldn't meet my eyes. He just stared at the restored photograph of Harold and Ruth, their arms around each other, laughing by the lake. You've done. It looks amazing." He would be so proud. The compliment, so alien from his lips, hung in the air between us. "What do you want?" I asked. It wasn't unkind. It was just a fact. He finally looked at me, and I was shocked by the raw, bottomless shame in his eyes. This was not a performance. This was a man who had been stripped bare. I was wondering if we could talk," he stammered. "Privately." I looked around. The cafe was full. I gestured with my chin toward the corner booth. The one where Harold and I had our last, quiet talk. The one where he had shown me the envelope. Bradley slid into the seat, his movements awkward, clumsy. I sat opposite him. The conqueror and the conquered, sitting in the king's old booth. He ran his hands through his unkempt hair. I don't know where to start. Try the beginning, I said, my voice quiet. I made mistakes, Claire, he blurted, the words tumbling out. God, what a stupid. I lost everything. What do you mean? He let out a laugh, a bitter, broken sound. The firm fired me. The day after the will reading. Patricia Hawthorne, she didn't just withdraw as counsel. She made a full report to the ethics board. Attempted manipulation of a vulnerable adult. Conspiracy to commit fraud. They didn't just fire me, they're reviewing my license. I'm ruined. He paused, swallowing. And Lisa, she left me. She left me the day I told her. She said she couldn't be married to someone who would try to steal from his own grandfather. She said I was a monster. She took half of everything in the divorce. Half of nothing. I just sat there, listening. The man who had mocked me for my tips, who had tried to have my grandfather declared insane to steal his money, was now destitute. She was right, he whispered, staring at his hands on the table. She was right about all of it. I was so stupid, Claire. I was so greedy. I spent my whole life chasing this idea. The suit, the car, the big firm. I thought that's what made you a success. I thought that's what mattered. And when I saw Grandpa, I saw him as this obstacle. An old man sitting on $2 million he was too senile to use. And I wanted it. I wanted it. He finally looked up, and I saw tears welling in his eyes. And you. I treated you like that. He gestured to the 50-cent piece that I still kept, sitting on the shelf by the register, a reminder. Because I was jealous. Because you were happy, and you had him. You had his love, and I had nothing. I had a corner office and an empty life. So what do you want from me, Bradley? I asked again, softer this time. I don't know, he said, and I believed him. Forgiveness, maybe? A chance. I don't deserve it. I know I don't. But I'm so alone, Claire. I miss having a sister. I miss the family we were supposed to be. I thought of Harold's letter. Be brave. Fight for love. The family we were supposed to be, I said, my voice gaining a hard edge. This isn't new, Bradley. You've been this way our whole lives. You, Mom, Dad, you've always seen me as less. You saw Grandpa as a burden. The money didn't change you. It just revealed you. I know, he choked out, the tears now rolling freely down his cheeks. I know, but I can change. I have changed. Losing everything, it shows you what matters. This, he gestured around the cafe, this matters. What you're building. This is real. I studied my brother, this broken, pathetic stranger. He wasn't a threat anymore. He was just a man who had made terrible, life-ruining choices. I can't forgive you, Bradley, I said honestly. Not now. Maybe not ever. Forgiveness it's not a word. It's an action. And you have a lifetime of actions to make up for. He nodded, wiping his face, seeming to accept it. Okay. What about Mom and Dad? Have you? They've called, I said. I haven't answered. They're a mess, he said. They're just as lost as I am. They followed me, Claire. My whole life. They thought I knew the way. And I led us all right off a cliff. I took a deep breath. I don't know if we can ever go back, Bradley. I know, he said, his voice small. But maybe we can go forward. Figure out how to be something new. I looked at him, truly looked at him, and for the first time, I didn't see the monster. I saw the sad little boy who had always needed to win. I slid out of the booth. I have to get back to work. He stood up, his face falling, expecting to be thrown out. I walked to the espresso machine, pulled a shot, and steamed some milk. I poured a perfect latte and placed it on the counter in a to-go cup. He walked over, confused. What? You look like you haven't eaten in a week, I said, grabbing a bag and putting one of Grandma Ruth's cheesecakes inside. I handed it to him. He fumbled for his wallet. It's on the house, I said. He stared at the cup, then at me, his eyes full. Claire, go home, Bradley, I said, my voice not unkind. Get some sleep. Fix your life. Then we can talk about something new, Dot. He nodded, clutching the bag and the cup like a lifeline. He walked to the door, And for the first time, he held it open for the customer coming in. He gave me one last look, a look of such profound, agonizing gratitude that it almost hurt. Then he was gone. I turned back to the counter, took a deep breath, and picked up my apron. The war was over. The mopping up had just begun. The next 2 years were a blur of construction dust, flour, and spreadsheet projections. Golden Mornings wasn't just a cafe anymore. It was a brand, a mission. We opened a second location in Brooklyn, a third in a quiet Upper West Side neighborhood. Each one was different, tailored to its community, but each one had the same soul. The mismatched chairs, the wall of photos, the cheesecake. The Golden Mornings Foundation was born, a small nonprofit I'd established to help other small, family-owned businesses navigate the complexities of leases and city bureaucracy. The Lake House, which everyone had forgotten, was my secret project. It was a sprawling, beautiful compound. I'd found Grandma Ruth's old journals, and she hadn't just been an investor, she'd been a visionary. She had drawn up detailed plans in the 1980s for a community retreat center, a place for workshops on cooking, gardening, and business. I was, brick by brick, making her dream a reality. I was building an empire, not of money, but of community. And it turned out, community was very good business. I was at the original location, reviewing catering invoices for the foundation's first fundraiser, when Sarah, my new assistant manager, tapped me on the shoulder. "Claire, there's a man here to see you. Says his name is James Caldwell. He looks expensive." I looked up. Standing by the door was a man who looked like he'd been carved from a block of granite and dressed by Armani. His suit was immaculate, his silver hair was perfect, and his smile, which he aimed at me, didn't reach his cold blue eyes. He was, as Sarah noted, expensive, and he was completely out of place. "Mr. Caldwell," I said, wiping my hands on my apron. "What can I do for you?" "Ms. Morrison," he said, his voice a smooth, confident baritone. He glided over to the counter, his eyes scanning the room, not with appreciation but with assessment. He was appraising the beams, the floor space, the corner location. "I'm with Caldwell Development Group. I'm sure you know our work." I did. Caldwell Development was famous for building glass and steel luxury towers that blocked out the sun. They were the apex predators of Manhattan real estate. "I'd like to discuss a business proposition with you," he said, placing a sleek business card on the counter. "I'm not looking for investors, Mr. Caldwell." "Oh, I'm not here to invest, Ms. Morrison," he said with that empty smile. "I'm here to acquire. We're planning a major mixed-use development project for this entire block. And the next one over. Your property here is the final piece of the puzzle." He spoke with such casual, absolute certainty, as if my selling was a foregone conclusion. "I'm not interested in selling," I said flatly. He chuckled, a dry sound. "Ms. Morrison, I don't think you understand the scope of what we're offering. We're prepared to offer you $15 million. For this location alone." The number hung in the air, obscene and glittering. 15 million. More than twice what my entire portfolio had been. Enough to retire, to live on a beach, to never work another day. "Mr. Caldwell," I said, sliding his card back across the counter. "My life has already been changed. Thank you. This cafe, this building, is not just a property. It's my grandparents' home. It's a community space. It is not, and will never be, for sale." His smile tightened, the first crack in the polished facade. "I see. You're one of those. The sentimental ones." He pulled a slim tablet from his briefcase. "Let me show you what you're refusing." He brought up an architectural rendering. A massive glass tower, sterile and anonymous, stood where Golden Mornings now was. Luxury residences, high-end retail, tech offices. It will bring significant economic development and displace every existing business and resident. I countered, my voice cold. "That's the nature of progress, I'm afraid," he said. "But we are prepared to be generous. My offer is $15 million. Cash. Closing in 30 days. You could open Golden Mornings anywhere you want. A better one." "You don't get it," I said, feeling that old, familiar anger rising in my chest. "This is the place. You can't replicate this. The answer is no." Margaret Shin had warned me about men like this. Men who only understood the language of money and power. Caldwell's smile vanished completely. "That would be Unfortunate, Ms. Morrison. These projects, they require full block acquisition to be economically viable. When one property owner holds out, it can create complications for everyone. Are you threatening me, Mr. Caldwell? I'm simply explaining how city bureaucracy works, he said, his voice dropping to a silky, dangerous level. Property taxes get reassessed. Building inspections become more frequent. Permit applications for, say, those other cafes you own, they can face unexpected, lengthy delays. It was Bradley's strategy, but with billions behind it. This was the true Goliath. I met his gaze. I've fought bullies before, Mr. Caldwell. Men who thought they could intimidate me, who thought my sentiment was a weakness. They were wrong. He stared at me for a long, cold moment. Then, he tapped his tablet, and the screen went dark. Everyone has a price, Ms. Morrison. It's just a matter of finding it. He stood to his full height. $24 million. That's my final offer. He had just raised his offer by $9 million. My heart hammered, not with temptation, but with revelation. You just told me two things, Mr. Caldwell, I said, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. First, that my property is worth far more than you offered. And second, that you need it so badly you're willing to pay anything. I'm making a mistake, am I? I said, echoing his words. No, I'm making a choice. And unlike many of the people you've probably bullied, I have the resources to back it up. Now, please get out of my cafe. His face darkened. You're making a serious mistake, Ms. Morrison. A $24 million mistake. You'll regret this. He turned and left, the bell on the door chiming angrily behind him. The harassment began within a week. A building inspector appeared, citing a violation for a structurally unsound facade that hadn't existed the day before. The health department showed up during the lunch rush, claiming an anonymous tip about improper food storage, an accusation that proved utterly false but managed to clear the cafe for an hour. My permit application for a new patio at the Brooklyn location? Suddenly, lost in the system. James Caldwell was making good on his promise. He thought he was squeezing a small, sentimental cafe owner. He had no idea he had just declared war on a woman with $6 million, a team of lawyers, and a direct line to a retired NYPD detective. He thought he was the new Goliath. He was about to find out I wasn't David. I was the one who had inherited the entire kingdom. 5 years. It felt like a lifetime. 5 years since Harold's passing. 5 years since the will reading that had cleaved my family in two. I stood in the original Golden Mornings, but it was no longer just a cafe. It was the flagship. It was the heart of an empire Harold and Ruth could never have imagined, though I hoped they would have loved every bit of it. We now had 7 locations across 3 boroughs. The Lake House was a fully operational retreat center, booked months in advance for workshops on everything from baking Grandma Ruth's cheesecake to helping small business owners navigate corporate law. The Golden Mornings Foundation was a recognized force in the city, a legal shield for the little guys. Today was the 5th anniversary of Harold's death, and the cafe was overflowing. We were hosting a celebration of legacy, and the line of people waiting to pay their respects snaked around the block. It wasn't a somber affair, it was a party. A local jazz quartet, one we'd sponsored, was playing in the corner. The scent of fresh ground coffee and warm pastry was thick in the air. Claire! Mrs. Patterson, now 86 and vibrant, waved me over. She had appointed herself official greeter, and was telling a young New York Times reporter, "Oh, Harold was the real deal, dear." He knew that serving someone coffee wasn't about the caffeine, it was about serving their soul. Claire just took that lesson and taught it to the whole city. Detective Morrison, now comfortably retired, was managing the flow of people with the ease of a man who'd handled far worse crowds. He caught my eye and gave me a proud wink. The past 5 years hadn't just been about growth, they'd been about the fight. James Caldwell had severely underestimated me. When his bureaucratic harassment continued, I didn't just defend, I attacked. "You're sure you want to do this?" my new legal counsel had asked me, 2 years into that fight. "It's aggressive." "I'm sure," I'd replied. My lawyer, the sharpest man I knew, had smiled. "All right, let's go burn him to the ground, sis." Bradley had, against all odds, become my greatest ally. After a year of therapy, part-time work at a legal aid clinic, and countless awkward family dinners I'd forced him to attend with our parents, he'd found his footing. He'd passed the ethics review by the skin of his teeth, and I'd offered him a job, run the Foundation's legal aid wing. He was, it turned out, a brilliant lawyer when he was fighting for something instead of against it. He'd helped me orchestrate the counter-assault against Caldwell, leaking a pattern of harassment and suspicious inspections to the press. Caldwell Development was now facing a massive investor lawsuit and a citywide investigation. "Claire," Sarah, now my COO, whispered in my ear, "you have an unexpected guest." At the door, I turned. My breath caught. It was James Caldwell. He looked smaller. The expensive suit was gone, replaced by a simple sports coat. He looked older, humbled. He approached me, his hands clasped in front of him, not as a predator, but as a supplicant. "Ms. Morrison, Claire, I know I am the last person you expected or wanted to see here." "Mr. Caldwell," I said, my voice neutral. I came to apologize," he said, his voice low, forcing me to lean in. "You didn't just beat me, Ms. Morrison. You taught me a lesson. A very public, very expensive lesson." He let out a dry, self-deprecating laugh. "After your campaign, my investors fled. My reputation was ruined. But that's not why I'm here." He looked around the room, at the joy, the community. "My daughter. She was 16. She read the articles. She came to me, and she said she was ashamed to be a Caldwell. She said, 'Dad, you're the villain in someone else's story. You tried to destroy something beautiful just to make money.' She was right. I spent my whole career seeing the city as a set of numbers. You see it as a set of neighbors." He pulled an envelope from his jacket. "I'm working with a nonprofit now, helping develop affordable housing. It's not much, but this is a donation for the foundation to help the next person or someone like me tries to bully. I wanted to say thank you for stopping me." I took the envelope, stunned. "Thank you, James. That means a great deal." At 2:00, the jazz quartet quieted, and I stood on a small platform. I looked out at the sea of faces, customers, employees, friends. My parents were in the back, sitting quietly. Mom finally looked proud. Dad just looked peaceful. And beside them stood Bradley, holding his 2-year-old daughter, a little girl with bright eyes named Ruth. "Thank you all for being here," I said, my voice thick with emotion. 5 years ago, my grandfather left me this cafe. But he left me something so much more important. He left me a legacy. Not a legacy of $6 million, but a legacy of love. Harold and Ruth Morrison believed that a business wasn't just about profit. It was about community. It was about creating a place where people felt seen, where they felt valued, where they felt home. I looked at the restored photo of my grandparents, laughing on the wall. All of this, it's not mine. It's ours. It belongs to every person who comes here for comfort, for connection. My grandfather's real will wasn't a piece of paper. It was a philosophy that you must fight for what you love, that you must protect those who are overlooked, and that the most valuable thing you can ever build is a place where everyone belongs. The applause was thunderous. Later that night, long after the last customer had left and the staff had gone home, I sat alone in the corner booth. The cafe was quiet, bathed in the soft glow of the streetlights outside. The air smelled of coffee and cheesecake and a history that was finally, peacefully at rest. I had it all: the thriving business, the community, the respect. I had even, in a strange, rebuilt way, gotten my family back. My parents, humbled, now volunteered at the retreat center. Bradley was the brother I'd always wished he'd be. I pulled out the 50-cent piece Bradley had thrown on the counter all those years ago. I still kept it. It wasn't a reminder of humiliation anymore. It was a reminder of my worth. A reminder that my family had valued me at 50 cents, but my grandfather had valued me at everything. I put the coin back on the shelf, under the laughing photo of Harold and Ruth. "We did it, Grandpa," I whispered into the quiet. "We really did." I locked the door to the cafe, the same lock Harold had turned 1,000 times, and stepped out into the cool Manhattan night. I wasn't the tired, defeated girl in the stained apron anymore. I was Claire Morrison, and I was finally home.